Hey, it's Joe West from the West Barn with
Mike Shimshack.
Today our guest is Gustavo Celis from Miami. We'd like to welcome him. Thank him for coming. Before we get into it, we want to remind you all to subscribe and hit notifications. But more than that, go ahead and share this with people you think it's of value to. We're organically growing and we want to keep it that way. So thank you for doing that. Welcome, Gustavo. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
We met Gustavo through our dear friend Near Z, who's been working on some records with him. Gustavo is a 9-time Grammy Award-winning engineer, works out of Miami area. 2 U.S. Grammys, 7 Latin Grammys. He's worked with artists like Shakira, Eric Clapton, Beyoncé, Ricky Martin, Jewel, Jennifer Lopez, Celine Dion, Pharrell Williams, and the list goes on and on. Gloria Estefan. So it's just a long, distinguished career, it looks like, 25 years in the music business. He graduated magna cum laude from the Berklee School of Music and was then awarded in 2019 an award they give to all of their prized people that have achieved, that have graduated. So he has been celebrated around the world and in the industry, some tech awards and just a ton of stuff. So we're really glad to have him on and excited that you're here. So thank you once again for coming on, buddy.
No, please. Thank you. By the way, I've never heard such nice things about myself in one run. It's usually bot.
Dude,
thank you so much.
The one mistake I made was putting a bio up years ago that wasn't a good one, and it's what everyone reads before I go on stage. And
oh yeah, those things haunt you forever, right?
I was trying to look around on the net on YouTube, and there's surprisingly little on you, which I think is cool, by the way. You know, like it's like all the people that are doing are usually not talking about doing. So
well, actually does.
This is funny that you should say that, because I'm constantly, on the social and stuff, you're constantly bombarded by this guy teaching how to make a hit, and this guy doing this and this, and I'm like, but example first, please. Where is it? Where is the things you?
That is brilliant.
It's so saturated with this kind of thing. I honestly feel I have absolutely nothing to teach. So I'm just learning.
Well, those are probably the best people to listen to. Is people that are doing, and you are doing it and have been doing it forever. And I've heard some of your mixes and they're stunning. One of the things that I noticed as soon as listening to a bunch of your mixes, it's like the vocals are killing it every time. It's like so many people focus on so many things. You'll have guys that are just down in their drum kit wanting their kick and snare to really dominate. And next thing you know, it's like, who cares? Because it's like 1 3-and or 4 on the floor and 2 and 4 on the snare. And it's like, it's beating you up, but it's like, who cares? Unless there's a great vocal. And it seems like you really focus. And if you look at your discography, you see that all these great vocalists, you're mixing a lot of their records, which is, that's why people go to you, because the vocals sound so great. So,
well, thank you for that. I always say that the first day is for vocals, and the last day is for vocals, and these things in the middle, they should work out themselves once that vocal is done, and it takes me a long time. I wish I had a shortcut,
Are you totally box right now?
Yeah. I've been for quite some time. I do have a hybrid setup with knobs and all that, but I increasingly use it less and less. And I think I pretty much was amongst the first, that's the first Icon board that they made, and it's not a board, it's a controller. But the idea back then, when I got it, I had the same idea. I had a 96 IO control room, all normal to vintage gear, and this is 2004, 2005. When these things are it's certainly the beginning of a lot of these, in terms of DSP emulation. So one thing happened that I started getting, like an article happening in one magazine where they did a magazine called I don't want to say, but anyway, they did. I was working with Mandy Moore, an actress basically, and we did a record, and it did well, and it had tracking on the radio. So they did this thing called Single of the Month or Cut of the Month. So at the end of the magazine, they would interview the engineer and dissect pretty much what gear was used, what mix, what you used for the mix, what you used for the mic pre, and all that stuff. So I told the guy, we did an interview, and next thing I read the magazine, and all my gear changed. They the guy said, like I use a Focusrite green or some shit like that, and it's like it's an insult. And then I opened the magazine, sure enough, there's a big spread about that product that was being released. And I'm like, this is insane. I mean, I can never ever trust again. I know there's better ones, but you can't really trust stuff. So I decided I have to, about all these plugins and about all these things, I just have to have a lab where I'm going to be the one deciding whether I think it sounds good for my things, rather than trusting this guy, says he uses it on the mix, or it's meaningless. So I made that call. And during that time, I started just literally A/Bing processors. The first thing to go was the EQs, when I basically printed some really matched EQs, and they flipped the face of the real hardware and the plugin, and realized that the signal disappeared completely.
Oh,
and
wow.
when I started doing this by myself, I had no one else to convince but me, So I progressively dropped things that to me sounded good enough. At least, like I always say in the mix, is with the smoke and the brandy and the lights. You're not listening to one mic pre, in a lab. In a mix, it's meaningless sometimes. These little details.
That's such a great point. I think that part of the sort of disease of being an audio engineer is thinking that a piece of gear is going to change the world for you, right? It's like we are if we spend half the time that we spent reading about and looking at gear on YouTube into actually making records and becoming better, the real cure is just taking what you have and making great records.
I mean, I seriously think that if we could somehow, like, I think about it every day. I'm like, what are these other 2,000 plugins doing in my folder? Like, I only really use like a handful,
They're making Pro Tools load slower for you is what they're doing.
Well, I mean, it's certainly a luxury when somebody sends something and they forget to print it and you have it. It's beautiful. But I mean, it's too many choices. Too many choices will kill a man for sure,
I think that is like an epiphany for people. It's like I used to stress out about that, and then I came to the conclusion, and I say this to everyone: all the gear I need to make a record was made by 1974.
That's probably right. Yeah.
All the gear, and I can use the digital versions of them. So it's not like it's not like I got to go get everything from that era, but it's like I need to get busy. This was like a message to myself. I need to get busy making this stuff work rather than searching for that new plugin that's going to change the world for me, because they don't exist.
It doesn't exist. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, primarily Mike and I, we work, and if our stuff is lucky enough to get big, it's in the United States. And then sometimes it will go off and have a life, in the Philippines or, do well in Germany. But we're continually making records and mixing records for the US. And I've noticed when I travel abroad that a lot of other countries listen to music differently. Like, and you're doing a lot of records all over the world. You're a global engineer. In the Latin world, I noticed that in Mexico, when I listen to the radio in Mexico, it's the worst sounding music to my ears. It's the worst sounding, what they like EQ-wise and sound-wise. It's like, I really wanted to ask you, like, what are you mixing? If you're mixing a record for Brazil or Mexico or Central America or the United States, do you mix it differently?
Well, I mean, the answer to that is probably not in the process, but yes in the outcome. Because the first thing I do, I mean, especially when you mention something like Brazil, it's not a little, it's like a vast universe of rhythms and cultural heritage that goes so way back. And just to come and say, well, I mixed this and that, and now you're gonna hear this, it's a huge mistake, because they've already done so many amazing things. So the first task is always for me to go and learn. I mean, it takes way longer, because I find myself listening to a lot of the records, watching YouTube films about, you know, how to play different rhythms, you know, from deep in the country, and trying to understand that, because it's like, you know, we go back to the cajon. It has nothing to do with Brazil, but it's the same. When I see a cajon, I see what I want to see. It's a drum set, like a kick and a snare, right? And we do all these kind of tricks sometimes in the mix to make it that way, and it's easy now to do it. But if you do that to you know, berimbau, or to all these instruments they have over there, the groove goes away. I mean, you may achieve a huge footprint of an instrument, but you know, you're messing with something almost sacred, you know, and you get it back in the comments, and the comments are, I mean, abysmal. You find yourself like you're not even talking sound yet, because it's all about the music, and I think some of that, when you say like maybe the music over here or over there doesn't sound the way we here think is good, it's because it's the instruments, you know, a lot to has to do with the instruments and the culture of heritage of the place, you know, and how they view sound, and how these things are more of a, I mean, and don't get me wrong, in those places there's things that you'll be like completely blown away. I mean, sonic landscape, and newer people, I mean, young people that are making records that don't really prescribe to what I'm trying to explain. But it's a balance between those two things, and the thing to respect is whatever it is they do. When I come in, I try to make it my own, but at the same time respect whatever it is that especially if he has an authentic, if they're trying to make pop, then we're all kind of in this very small box where we all are competing for that kind of footprint on the mix, and you have no choice. You know, the decisions are going to be made, and you have to make them, and there's going to be less room for that kind of thing. And in the case, for example, with Shakira, that happens a lot, where you're trying to make a pop record, but then she comes with, you know, with an Andean flute, and then that's the feature of the song, and then it's not going to be a sample. You're actually going to go to the Andes and record the guy that puts sand inside an Inca flute that never would be in tune, because it was never designed for 440, and you know, these kind of things, and then that becomes a huge hit, and then you're like, how did that happen? You know, because
right. But
when you were in it, you know,
do you
it
find
seemed
that
like a crazy idea? You know?
Step outside of the composition or the arrangement and cultural aspects, do you find that in those mixes that you may say, hey, I can crank more high end into this culture's mix than what I would do in the States, or the vocal sits differently in respect to the mix? Do you find that at all?
Not really. Maybe I'm just one of those guys, you know. I don't know. But if anything, the vocal is going to be the focus for me. I mean, regardless of, that's the one thing that I find it works. You know, it works everywhere.
Do you ever do different mixes of the same song with the same orchestration for a different market, or once you get a mix, it will work around the world?
It will work around the world. I mean,
oh, that's awesome. Yeah. You were also, I wanted to call back to when you said like you want the cajon to be, and a cajon, for those, everybody should know this, but it's a box you sit on. If they don't have room or it's a small date, they'll bring this little box, the drummer sits on it, he plays the front, there's some snares inside, and then he can hit with his heel and it can become like sounding like kick drum. So it kind of replaces a drum kit in some performance situations. But do you find that like you were saying about how you would get it, you want this sound for it, but then it maybe doesn't work against the rest of the percussion. It takes away from it. A lot of people early on in their engineering careers will solo something and work on it for an hour and then not pay attention to its relative context to the mix. I find that truly great engineers will abandon their preconceived notion of what a cajon should be and listen to the whole mix and say, how am I going to make this work? I'm confident enough in my skills to make this work within the context so that I don't ruin the agogos or the, tablas or any other, groove, really ancillary, everything that's not on the 2 and 4, backbeat stuff, swing stuff. Do you do a lot of soloing, or do you start off and say, hey, let me get all these faders up, find out what the song is about? Like, what's your process when you get a bunch of tracks in and you got to decide, okay, let me hear the song first, or do you just start soloing things and working on it?
Yeah, I mean, never too much of a solo kind of guy for that kind of thing, EQing, but for editing, absolutely. I mean, especially vocals. I mean, these things, not tuning, but I mean, when I'm in the comping process of a vocal, for example, which I do a lot, and sometimes I do it even if that's not the task, because I find that that's where, I mean, you can compress and crank something if there's little things in it, like that's the one thing that will distract in a mix. Hold on, I was getting things. Let me turn on it, do not disturb on this Mac. That being said, it's no, EQ wise, which I typically very minimal. I only use like a 3-band EQ on everything. I mean, and normally it's just to fix something, or things like that. And typically just EQ. That would be like the first thing I do when I listen to a song. I master it. The first at the beginning of the mix.
Yeah.
So as I'm playing the track, I just remember what I did yesterday. I remember the references that I'm going against, and then I put it in that place, EQ wise, in mastering. And then after that, then I start EQing, and what I find is that the first thing to do is probably EQ down, and darken things, because these things where people either use mics that are bright, or in other words, the relationship between all the instruments is not temporally balanced. So you have a vocal that's bright, but then you have this super dark guitar, and the expectation of these things coexist. I mean, nobody knew it was going to work because nobody really heard it until then. So it happens a lot. I mean, it's happening less now, but yeah, it does happen. So to me, that I think that's the process. So I'm listening, and I would probably spend like a day on the vocal.
But I'd imagine that's changed in your career. Early on, 30 years ago, when I started mixing records, I was a soloer, because it's like, how else do you deal with 100 things, right? You have to one at a time. But as I got older, I've kind of realized, wait a minute, this is not me. The only thing I know when I solo something is it's going to sound different than when it's in the full mix. So I made a decision to start to think holistically. I think you brought up a really cool point too, which is like, sometimes you listen to a vocal or a guitar and it doesn't bother you. The high end won't bother you, but you have to say, you know what, because sometimes if I want my guitar to be brighter, I got to darken my vocal rather than I'm sorry, let me say that again. If I want my guitar to be brighter, I would darken my vocal, so that in relative perspective, there's sometimes you pull up a track and you're like, oh, this guitar sounds fine. But you might need to do something to that guitar to make the rest of the work mix, or the rest of the mix work, rather than to fix that guitar. How many times have you worked on a bass guitar and then realized your kick drum sounded totally different?
Exactly. I mean, and then you look at these curves, which are horrific. I mean, if you ever open one of my mixes, you're like, what is going on? It's just like 20 dB boost on something. And then you realize, who cares? I mean, nobody's going to see that. But it's the relationship. There's a reason why that's happening. And it is irrelevant. It's irrelevant.
And when you're young, you feel like, I used to look when I was working on large format consoles, and I would look at the EQs, and I'd be like, I would get stressed out because the EQs were so turned, right? And I'd be like, that can't be right. You know, you just self-doubt yourself. And then you have a guy like you come on, or I can remember it was either Tom or Chris, where it was like, those guys are unapologetic, the Lord Alge brothers. And they're just like, I don't care what I have to do to it as long as it sounds the way I want it to sound. And you start to say like, oh, I'm doing it wrong, or I'm irresponsible, is what you feel as a young engineer. And then you realize people will give you the freedom after hearing a guy like you talk, or someone they respect, or a mix that they loved, and they find out how it was actually accomplished. And they actually say, wow, okay, I can really go for it. And it's like, all that matters is the end result. All that matters is the final product, which is, we're talking about leaps here in your career. It's like 25 years ago, you weren't the same mix engineer. Like your processes,
absolutely.
You didn't understand the consequences and what you could get away with. And slowly along the way, you see as a new engineer, there's so many new engineers because musicians are becoming engineers, that they're realizing along the way by finding guys they respect like you, and saying, okay, maybe I can go ahead. And even though it doesn't look right on paper, or they might throw me out of the academy because of my 20 dB of EQ, it doesn't matter as long as I can move somebody with the end result. And that's a really liberating process. And you got to be careful, because then you'll have every channel will have 10K boosted by 6 dB, right? And then you get into a war of just sort of attrition.
This will never ever happen, because the mix already has that, and I took all the EQs, away, because that's the first thing I would do, because we know that what a flat or close to flat microphone sounds like is not what we're going to put in these things,
right?
So, and we're going to do it to every single thing in the record. So why even put an EQ on these things if you have an amazing mic and a great player in a great room, you track with a great mic pre, that's ready to be mastered. That doesn't need a mix, in my opinion,
It doesn't, unless it's relatively against something else needing something, which is like the difference between I'm working on you vocal and I'm working on mix and vocal, where it's like I'm making decisions that are best for the both of them, which is that's what takes experience. That's what takes having done it your 10,000 hours to know what you can get away with. Because young guys will take this and they'll liberate themselves and they'll go do a bunch of stuff, and then they'll listen to their mix the next day and say, what the heck was I thinking? They get threshold shift. It's all low end and all high end, But a guy like you knows when to pull back on the leash and say, I can get away with this on this, but I can't keep going down that road, because I'm going to end up with a threshold shift where, you don't realize it until you listen to it on another listen that you went completely berserk. So it takes the experience in a guy like you to liberate some folks, but it's also what those guys need to. You can't put a young engineer in like an alcohol-fueled funny car, because they're sure to be in the grandstands. You got to have somebody who can control that horsepower.
Yeah, so, I think you're right.
I also wanted to ask you, you work so much in the pop world and so much in what I would call urban too, right? And on a lot of those records, I would get pressure from people to crank the low end, more low end, and more. When you start to touch anything under 100 hertz, everybody starts to smile, and then everybody wants more of it, right? How do you control your clients, just their desire to overload on low end when somebody is pushing you to do more and more low end? How do you, your mixes have great low end, but they're never too much. Tell me how you convince them to pull back on the reins from those massive subsonic frequencies.
Well, I mean, these things I love as well, but to me, unless it's clean, it's useless, and it's really hard. I mean, I guess I'm not good enough like those, because I hear some of those records and they're like, man, this is so massive. But then you realize, well, the construction of the mix is different, because
good point.
This is the focus of the production itself. Sometimes it's an 808 that's in perfect harmony with the rest of the very sparse harmony, by the way, and that not in a bad way, in a great way, because this allows these mixes that you're like, man, these things are massive, and but they're not really distorted. The problem is when you have all these acoustic instruments and programming and a real bass and a synth bass and all these things. You need to make you all these things have to work, and that's really, really hard. So there is a limit.
How do you deal with that when you get, let's say you're just a mix engineer and files come into your room and you hear like, oh, they've got synth bass, they've got a real bass, they've got things that are just totally clobbering one another, not in the best interest from a orchestration standpoint. How do you deal with that whenever you are just the end guy? You just turning stuff down and off that you think doesn't work for the mix?
Sometimes, or sometimes, going crazy, thinking of, ways to key things, with something like I don't know, like an F6 EQ, automating a certain band interacting between two basses, for example, and then you can, make that event a cohesive event. But you have to control these things, and more importantly, you have to be able to hear. There is a problem because this buildup in bass, when things coincide, it's super dangerous unless you hear it in a room. You're
right.
blind. You're blind. So it's very important. I mean, I've gone through great lengths. I mean, even to the point of just literally playing, or transcribing a bass, or putting a bass through Melodyne and getting the MIDI notes and adding a sub bass to that. I've done this many times. And then people say like, well, this mix is great. It sounds amazing. It's like, well, I mean, it's really not a mix. It's almost a production, But on the other hand, I mean, I fought that fight so many times already that I'm not gonna. I don't care. I'm like, I'll charge you what I think I need to charge you, and I'd rather not see you ever again. But in terms of contracts and stuff, because this situation gets so contagious. So sometimes that you can't. It's not worth it.
Yeah.
How long do something to a song, like that, and then you the younger me had an expectation, but now I'm like, well, unless because what happens now is that you also know whether this song is going to go anywhere or not. So maybe the contracts and the paper will be more expensive than the actual, gain. But
how long does it take you to mix a song on average?
I would say 3 days,
3 days.
Yeah.
It's so interesting, dude, because we just had Billy Decker. I don't know if you know Billy Decker. We just had Billy Decker on the program, who prides himself. When I was making the thumbnail for that, I was hoping people wouldn't think I was bashing him, but he calls himself the McDonald's of mixers. And he mixes a song in about 45 minutes to an hour. His process is so streamlined. What he does is so repeatable that he's like, and people come to him because they know what they're going to get, and he's great and he's diligent and he's been able to make that work for him. But I think it's a beautiful thing that in our art form, you guys use the same exact gear, but what he does in 1 hour and he puts out a creative thing that he's happy with, you'll take 3 days for. And I think that's interesting.
Sometimes longer, I'm not proud of that, I wish, I mean, I had a shortcut. I can't, it's a problem. It's a defect, it's not an asset, obviously. I mean, but I make sure that first of all, it's like it's only certain clients can you can have with this kind of situation,
Right.
And those clients typically will, the ones that I have kept, will appreciate this. They have the ear to discern this detail in the mixes, because remember, you and nobody else heard what I got. So these people that appreciate that, whatever it is that I'm doing in those 3 days, are my clients. The others that don't have the patience and they expect complete, respect of what they sent, they're not my clients,
That's, you go from being a young engineer where you're like desperate to be in the studio working. So you take everything and anything you get. We had probably, I would say for me, that spanned about 10 to 12 years of my existence.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But then it's like, this is interesting because like Billy Decker clients are not your clients. And
No.
it's really smart to be able to recognize, like, hey, these are not my people. And if I spend my time trying to please people that aren't my people, we're both going to be miserable. So when did you find that you started to find your people, like to be able to grow into the kind of work that you knew would be not just supporting you for the day because you had to work that day, right? You're at the beginning of your career, but the clients that you realized that you were the best for them and they were the best for you, and not everybody should be your client, and that's okay. That's when did that happen for you? When did you start growing into that kind of relationship and realizing that?
Well, I mean, these things, I think it's like things attract each other a little bit. I don't know. I think I guess the maniac in me attracts the maniac in them. I mean, it's just this kind of people attract each other. I don't know how to explain it, but
how many years in did that start to happen?
I would say, I mean, I realized it maybe like 15 years ago, you know, when I realized, you know, I mean, the music industry was changing a lot, and I realized that that behavior wasn't acceptable. Certainly not in the times where you have to pay for this, for the assistant, for the studio, for all this, and sustain these events, you know, because that's not a mix, that's an event. so you know, I basically really lucky to work with people that wasn't never a problem, you know. They had the budgets, and then they were also in search of things like that, you know, like they weren't really trying to do something exactly the way it was done by others. Some of the stuff that was done actually was copied many times because it was original, you know. It didn't look after a certain framework, you know.
I think that's a talent, though, to be able to be sort of in your own head, to figure out like what's working for you and what you want. There's a lot of pressure to just stay working. So I applaud you for being able to recognize, oh, this is what I'm good at. And if I just focus on what I'm good at and who I am naturally, I'm not the hour mixer, I'm the 3-day mixer. And then I need to realize if that's who I am, I need to start to position myself so that I can be successful with that. And every record I do where they want me to mix it in an hour or 3 hours, we're both wasting our time. You know, so it shows that you're an entrepreneur, which I think is not all that natural for us as engineers and producers and mixers. We want to be working. We want to be on everything that's successful. But being able to realize that you're not a good fit for a record. And in my old age, I've been doing that, realizing, hey, I'm not a good fit for you. I wouldn't be, at the end of it, yeah, it would be listenable and this would be a good record. And maybe it could be a hit, but I'm not the right person for this record. You should be working with Mike Shimshack. You guys are going to be exactly what each other aren't. You know, you're going to fit in and you guys are going to strive for the same things. That's a skill that engineers need to learn.
As an entrepreneur, do you handle your own business, or do you have a business manager? Do you have a manager that manages your mixing?
No. I do it by myself. Yeah.
Have you ever had
one? Yeah.
No, I mean, I had studios, like commercial studios with studio managers and stuff like that. But I realized I didn't like this kind of situation where you get into these kind of details. I mean, especially if you're doing that kind of stuff, you don't really need a lot of clients, you know, because the clients that you do have are longer term, and the projects will inevitably be longer because it's not only the mix that takes 3 days, it's all the build up to that. I've been in the last few years been more involved with whole, you know, production and development of things rather than just mixing. I mean, I still do it all the time, and people from really all over all these countries you mentioned, they send tracks, you know, all the time. And I treat those tracks the same way. I treat the other clients that I'm involved with the production, but obviously when you started from scratch in a record, this thing takes months and sometimes years. And so where is the rest of the time? Why do you need so many clients, you know? I don't prescribe to that. I mean, I don't think it's necessary. What's important is to be doing what you want to do, and to have somebody that needs that, or you have a good team or relationship with that person,
Yeah.
or a group of clients, you know.
Yeah, managers will end a conversation a lot quicker than you'll end it. Like for me, I don't know for you, but like when I'm working with a client, like I just had someone reach out from a famous band from the '90s and wants to maybe do a record, and he asked me what my rate was, and I always balk at that because if I just give him a rate, it seems like that's a period at the end of a sentence, right? And it's like if I had a manager, they'd say, hey, if you want to work with Joe, it's X if he's producing the record, mixing the record. But if I talk to him, I can sometimes extend that conversation and find out if we should truly be working together. And if I believe we should truly be working together, well, then the conversation is a little more malleable. It's like, well, we can make it for this amount of money if we do it this way. You know, you could actually, you know, find yourself with exponentially more work without a manager because they're just worried. They just have a list of rates. If they want you to record at your studio with you there, with you engineering, with you producing, with you mixing. And then if they don't, it's just like a menu. But I find that in our business, if you want to have longevity, you've got to work with people and see if you're the right person and then see how and if it can be done. And a lot of times, even after I talk to them, it can't be done. But there's plenty of times where a manager would have not gotten me a gig that I was able to do and I was the right guy for the record. So,
yeah.
And people don't realize managers don't get you work. They manage your work. People think they're going to get a manager and then all of a sudden their calendar is going to be full. And that's just not the way it is.
Yeah, I always thought it was cumbersome or something. You know, like every time I dealt with somebody, even the biggest of those clients you mentioned, they just call me. It's like a personal thing. It's not. I don't want to. I never had somebody say like, "Well, you should use this guy." They literally call me, and I did nothing. You know, I just been doing what I'm doing, and that happens. So, I guess the day that doesn't happen, I'll have to get a manager, you know, and do a lot of you know, online clinics or something. I don't know, or because otherwise, I mean, I don't even have time to think about that.
Yeah.
You know?
Is this a commercial space you have, or is this space in your house?
No, this space is in my house. It's detached from the house, but it's like it's a mixed room and it has a booth. It's not much, but I really love it here because there's windows, you know, and it sounds incredible. It really I love working here.
It looks incredible too. It looks like it's a stork designed room.
It's actually Pilsner Chusto, but you know, Martin Pilsner up in Canada.
I see that you have an Ampex machine back there. Do you use that?
There is an ATR 102 there, yes. I've used it. I've used it at times, you know, for a minute there. Not long ago. I think the last record that I did is funny enough, but it was like a Dee Snider record. So it was like a rock thing, but Broadway rock. It was really funny.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I you know, I decided to but then I ended up paying for the tapes to go to Stephen Marcus in LA for the mastering, and then the tapes were, I mean, it was just like a whole logistical nightmare. Right. And I find it used, you know, less and less. I used it really cool, you know, on a record with an Argentinian artist who's, you know, he's like the Billy Idol of I mean, Billy Joel of the South, and he's a piano guy, you know, and great. He's done the best songs, you know, down there, and you know, we were making this record with a Brazilian artist as well, and it was this really like rocking, like 70s kind of song. So that was the last time I used it. That was like 2 years ago, and I actually used it for a flange effect with the hand, but did it in a way with because you need two machines. So I just did it with, you know, calculating all these delays and stuff, and set it up with a real you know, Pro Tools file, recording and playing back, and this thing playing back, and just doing the finger, and then doing a mix inside the box, and then printing that. And that was so cool because
So when you say
you can't really
when you say
can't
with
really
the
do it with a
finger,
plugin, you know?
you're talking about hitting the capstan motor so you could slow it down, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, hitting actually the flange of the tape, you know, just to slow it down and speed it up.
Yeah. So
And,
what you might not know, people, is that like when you do a tape flange, which is the greatest of all flanges, if you have to have it moving, so you have one signal here that is identical to a signal here, and then you play them both back. But if you play them both back, there'll just be a delay, and it will sound like you have a delay. So what you got to do is put your thumb on the capstan motor, which moves the tape, and it slows it down. So now it's going. You got this signal delaying over this and vectoring back, and when it does that, you get that beautiful flange. The other thing that is great about it is if you take the things out that you don't want flanged, they won't flange. So let's say you have the vocal printed on your first file, but you don't want the vocal to flange. You just want the band to flange. You leave out what you don't want to flange on the second copy. And only the things that are identical between the two copies flange. So you could say, I don't want the vocals to flange. I don't want the bass guitar to flange, but I want the cymbals. You just feed the stuff that you want to flange over to the second machine. And if you get it right, it's one of those things you'll sit there for an hour trying to get an 8-bar section right. But when you get it right, man, there is nothing in the digital world that can do that.
Nothing. Yeah. So that's one reason to still have it. And you know, the upkeep of those things is
that half inch or quarter inch?
It's a half inch. It's a half inch.
That's a great machine, man. I have a Studer B67. And it gets used quite a bit, but you're right. It requires you to it's almost like you've got to go to archaeology school. And you know, I used to align tape machines back in the day, but I forget more than I remember. And every time I go to align the bias on my machine, it's like I got to go watch an hour and a half of YouTube videos to remind myself the over bias and which tape stock. And it takes a bit of getting together. And if you're going to send those half-inch tapes, you're right. If you send them somewhere else, well, you got to make sure that they know what they're doing because
yeah. I mean,
their
there's
machine.
few mastering places that I would trust for that. But you know, I mean, when it works, it works. It's amazing. It's one way of doing it. That's I mean, it also puts your changes your frame of mind when you're building this mix. I mean, I don't know. I've done it a lot, but I don't do it that much now, and don't really miss it that much. I mean, because of all these reasons, you know. But it's a beautiful thing to have, and a knowledge that I treasure, you know, and that I'm thankful to have and willing to pass on it.
It's a good point because you'll derive ideas for your digital mixing world because of your knowledge for that analog machine, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's good to know it because it will change the way you work digitally. And that's something I hadn't really thought about. But yeah, you'll say, oh, I need to think of it like this, or I'm going to try to achieve this aspect of that with overbias, you know, or what the old Dolby SR, Dolby A used to sound like. I'm going to get that in my drum sound.
I mean, and that machine, I'm sorry to interrupt, but even that machine in particular, just the transformers, the iron in that machine is just going through the machine already gives you, you know, a gift, you know,
right?
And that's also interesting, you know. That's also interesting.
It's interesting too because I can tell details matter to you, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I could see how you'd want to get away from that machine if details matter and you want to be able to recall it in a year and then be able to reprint it and have the saturation and the tape formulation and to have a repeatable result. Like that's not going to be easy to do a year from now. So I can see how a guy who is the details matter is that like, hey, I want to be able to call up that Shakira, you know, hips don't lie in 10 years. I want to be able to recall it and be able to reprint it and know what's up. And God forbid you still have that machine in 10 years and what condition it's in.
Yeah, it's a romantic and foolish idea, which I never discount as extremely valuable, you know, in a creative setting, you know. So
yeah, can you tell me, like, when you're working on an artist like Shakira, and you seem to be her go-to person for about a decade, right? Like, were you doing the recordings as well, or were you just mixing?
Yeah, we were. I was all in, you know, on that project for a decade, basically.
Wow.
2005 to till 2016 or something like that. It was exclusively, you know. I mean, and I almost had no chance. If you look at my discography, it took a dive because I couldn't make any more records. People would call me, and I would always be inevitably traveling with her, or these records would take a long time, a long time with her, you know. And there would be transcontinental always, you know. Let's record, you know, in Uruguay. Let's go to Paris for a month, then let's go here, and then and that was the vibe. And you had to have this thing that you could take your record, you know, with you everywhere you went. And she really has a good ear, like printing vocal up takes by 0.2 dB, for example.
Oh wow!
So this, you know, it's almost borders into madness, but I would indulge her in these exercises, because she also at the same time becoming a producer and learning about all these things. To her, all these things were also new. So, but that's the one thing. There you can appreciate a client that appreciates your work, because if she says, or because you know, you can try to play that game of, oh yeah, I did this, and then you fake that you're moving a knob, right? Like this is a classic engineer trick. And and it wouldn't work because she can hear it, you know. And this is important, you know, because then you realize all this time and whatever you're doing, at least one person can appreciate it, and that's, I think that's important, you know.
So listening is an art, and there's listening that happens in a detailed, focused listening that's different than maybe an artist listen, or you listening to it a day later where you're not focused on the details. I learned to listen that way over the years. It's like, how do I listen myopically like a total surgeon? And then how do I listen like a listener? Because there's different things I get from each of those listens. So if I'm able to like listen back to a mix like it's the first time I've heard it, or like I haven't heard the record for a year and I hear it back, I hear totally different things. And I think that's probably the Shakira. Like, I think artists can hear things that we're impressed by, but the reality is that they're so locked into the feel and energy and the delivery that they know when the chemistry is wrong, where we would know it too, but we're listening so precisely that sometimes we miss the forest for the trees. You find that?
This is correct, yeah. And there's a good exercise, and it's happened to me many times, and I don't know, it used to happen more because there were more attended mixes, but literally the minute a person walks in the room during the mix, or when you're showing the mix, you completely hear the song different for the first time.
You, by the way.
Yeah, right.
Say that again, Mikey.
I'm glad it happens to Gustavo too. That's every time someone walks in, it sounds like a different song to me.
Yeah, because you start trying to, for the first time, imagine through their ears, or what you, or your impression, or your picture of this person's brain gets temporarily transferred to you, and you listen through their head for that minute. Yeah. It's incredibly valuable, because if you had because sometimes I got these notes and I listen in the morning and I would write in a pad, you know, first pass, really, you know, low volume, and just make notes. And then I would go make breakfast and do whatever I do. And then I come back and just literally just do the notes in like 2 minutes.
That's so true.
But when you do that with another person, you get another set of notes. And this is almost science. You can see the two notes. I mean, it's the same print, it's the same mix. How come I'm having different observations? So it's very interesting.
Have you ever seen one of those? They used to make them on posters, but they have them online now, where there's all these like recurring sort of things in a photo, and you look at it, and then it pops into 3D, and you could see like something.
Oh yeah.
That's,
I remember that.
When I had that experience with my ears, like when I'm saying when I'm able to listen as an artist, it's because it's like you can't do both at the same time. You have to go into one and come out of one, and then see it as a two-dimensional object, and then the three. Once I found out that I could do that, or I learned how to do that, my mixes went to a different level. And that was like, I wanted to like expand on that and nurture that so that I was able during my mixing to have periods where I would like say, okay, my first listen is critical. If somebody comes into my control room and talks at me during my first mix, I become like I lose my shit. Like because it's so the first listen is so valuable in the morning, right? So you can't have your assistant gabbing at you about I get that out of the way before we start on that. But so like I do that, and then like if I find myself kind of losing my way, like thinking like, oh man, I'm just uncertain. Well, then I'll work on editing some drums or tuning a guitar or tuning a vocal, and I'll put them on headphones. I'll listen through headphones turned up loud so I can get back onto the monitors for a first time again in an hour. Or I'll go make some toast and have a coffee and smoke a cigar and come back. And I've learned how to do this along my mixing process. And I think it's something that no one talks about this, but I guarantee you, if you can find a way to do this, it's almost like practicing yoga. If you could find a way to get into that mental status where you can find ways to renew your first listens to mix, listen as a total detail-oriented audio engineer, and then listen as a total listener, a total artist. If you can manage those, your mixes will literally, they will go to a completely other level. Things you didn't think you were capable. You're almost like two mix engineers in one. That's something I want to continue to develop. But I hear it in what you're saying with this Shakira thing. I had a guy in Pittsburgh when I was starting off. He was telling me he heard this sound, and I was listening for the life of me on a tape. We were on a tape machine, so we were looping it. And I couldn't hear it. Sure enough, I went down through all these choir vocals, and this woman in the middle before a lyric, she snapped her lips.
Yeah. That happens.
I was so blown away that this guy, I said, this guy's got like other level. He's got legendary ears. But what I didn't realize was he was listening to a different mix than I was listening to. The same mix, but he was listening to it differently. You know, I think that's powerful, man. You can really, you have to be an artist to do it. You have to grow your artistry to do it. But once you do it, it goes somewhere else. That's an incredible thing.
In listening, there's also these two, I mean, at least the way I see it, maybe because of musical training or whatever, but what I see, there's two listens. Is like the horizontal listen, you know, where it's time. I mean, it's about impression over time. And then there's the vertical listening where all these things come into play, like, coinciding events and how things happen in an instant. And this ability to listen to vertical instances and be able to store them, as a like a chord, right? Like, because you can listen a chord as moving lines, each part of the melody inside the chords, like, or you can listen to chord formations and know what that means. But there's value in both.
Yeah, and you just leading, have to, there's a mental point of focus though, where you decide I'm going to listen to the bass of this chord, right? Like when you listen to that chord on 5 different listens, you will say, "All right, my brain is focused on finding the root note of this chord, and then where they're voicing the 3rd and the 5th and the 7 or 9 or the add 13." Those are all different listens, and someone will always say, like, "How can you listen to that song all day?" And I tell them I'm listening to different things every time. It's frustrating for you because you just hear it looping around, but I'm listening to a specific item within that spectrum every time.
It's infinite. Yeah. Sometimes I have this problem with, because some people say like, "Oh, but this thing about and people will mention the lyric or something about and I'm like, what are you talking about? I don't even know. Like sometimes I don't even, it's like so much information in the other realm that this thing, the words, are you kidding me? Like I haven't even gotten there, like this is day 3 and I still don't, because you're over focused with all these little
hyper
details.
Focus.
Yeah.
And that's got to be the key, is to be able to go from hyper vigilance on a specific thing, be exact on it, and then be able to zoom all the way out so that you're seeing it from like the moon, and that's a real art form. And I still struggle with it, man. I can't tell you the times I've recalled a mix, made a change and say that sounds better, and then realized I didn't have my record. I was listening to the old mix. Even 30 years later, thinking, I got this down, man. I could do this. I'm good at this. And then it's like, oh, snap. I just rose the vocals. And it's like, I was listening not on input. So I was listening to yesterday's mix. And it's like, I'm a total loser and a hack. I need to get out of the business. Still happens to me.
Yeah. So, man.
Powerful thing, your perception.
Man, seeing that because we were talking about Shakira and the traveling and seeing that mic, I gotta tell you this thing about listening again and about I guess hyper focusing on things. Somewhere along those 10 years, she comes. We take a little break and then we come back to make a new record. And she had a studio at her house in the Bahamas. I would fly there, every week and then come back. So 20-hour flight, 20-minute flight. So I was there a lot, and things get, start getting repetitive. I guess she got really tired of headphones. Like for a minute there, she's like, "No, I'm not singing anymore." I'm like, "Well, but we need to sing. I mean, you got to sing. I mean, we need the singer. This is what we're here for, No, I'm not singing in this record. I'm like, what are you talking about? Not if I have to wear headphones. I want to sing, like I'm singing right here. And I'm like, well, then we're gonna have to make it work like that. So I switched to that mic and started the trusted SM7, and said, well, if this is the way you want to do it, I'm gonna make you sign a contract. And I literally wrote it like in a napkin or something. I said, like, these are the rules, we're gonna tape the mic, because she used to sit in a chair in the sweet spot because she's really focused on the sound. So she would always sit behind me. In every studio, everywhere we went, it would be the same setup. And so she had like a lounge chair, and I would set up baffles or blankets or whatever I had right behind her head. And then would tape that mic. I remember doing like a funny thing with a drumstick so the stand doesn't. And I would take that drumstick wherever we were and do this thing where you couldn't move, like the physical point of the mic, you couldn't move it left, right, up or down anymore, And it would stay there for weeks, wherever we went. And the purpose was that I would make her sing, and she wanted to sing with the, Genelex pretty much full on. But I would take notes and just record whatever. So one of the rules was we cannot change your cue mix. Okay, so it has to stay. The other rule was you cannot change that stand, and we cannot change the monitoring level. Every take has to be at this volume, and I would write it down and have notes for each song, and it worked. So at the end of the night, I would record the pass of the room without her in there when she would leave, out of phase, and then do a comp and subtract that pass of the playback, and it will go away. I mean, if you listen to those vocals now, you think they're headphone mixes, like headphone cues, but they're not. They're fully blasting on a control room with Genelex. And the funny thing is that at the beginning it wouldn't work, and I'm like, man, I'm missing something. So I start thinking, imagining this sound coming back into the mic. I'm like, what's missing? Is the resonator. So it was her mouth opening and closed. So at the end of the night, I had to sit and mimic the song and sing the way she sang, without singing. So I would get the reflections back into the mic, and it would cancel.
This is
all
brilliant.
The way,
So this is so just to distill this. She would sing the vocal, all things would remain constant. So the microphone, although it's more directional than like a C12 or E47, it would get a little bit of the music, and then you would play back the track at the same exact level, record it on another track, and all you're hearing is the bleed at this point, and your face bouncing the sound back in your mouth.
And mouthing, yeah.
And so whenever you reverse the phase on that and you bring the fader up, there's going to be a null point, and all of a sudden you're going to have vocal with none of the playback bleed.
With the exception that we would do 50 takes. So, I wouldn't subtract that to every take.
The comp.
Because that would be insane, so I would comp and then subtract,
And was her vocals better? when she did it that way?
Oh, yeah, they were so much better. I mean, she
So-
was into the music. It was well worth the trouble, you know.
I've tried the same thing with varying degrees of. I don't think I'm as detailed oriented as you. So,
But this is crucial because if you know face, you know how important it is. There is no
your null point will move.
one inch or less, you're done. You will hear that much more or less, you know,
Yeah.
in different frequencies because of the room notes and all that.
Well,
So
I
it's-
applaud a guy like you who I imagine is neurotic about the details to be able to say, hey, the art is more important than the technology. Let's not forget why we're here, right? And if you're
Well-
telling me you got better vocals out of her, I mean, that's what it's about, man. It's like finding solutions for artists so that they can be the best artists that they can be.
She had, you know, understandably just pressure, you know, the headphones. We went through it. It's not like we didn't try. We spent that week, we probably spent 10 grand trying to fix the headphone problem. You know, we got the best headphones, we got the best amps, we got the best everything, but still it was the actual physical pressure on her head that she's, you know, didn't want anymore, you know.
Yeah.
I think she went back to headphones at some point, but because this is not easy to do, especially to travel with this, because it's hard to do in different locations. I mean, and then come between those two things, you know, it became an issue, but you know, it got to a point that that's the way it was, and it worked.
Yeah, that's a cool story about, you know, you would think, oh, I'm compromising the technology and the sound, but what does it matter if you have an uninspired performance, right?
Or no performance, because she refused to get in the booth, you know. That's a bigger problem, you know.
And how do you like that? You know, travel, I mean, it seems so exotic. You're hanging out with Shakira in the Bahamas at her place. So it sounds really fun, but that's got to get old, right? You got to miss your family.
Yeah. At times it became very difficult, you know. I mean, you don't show it, you don't let it show, but it becomes, you know, it's like the road guys. I mean, but the thing is that I'm not a road guy. I really literally, I think I picked this in the music because I didn't have to go touring, you know. That's why I ended up in the studio. Yeah, you know, it's like anything else. You miss your family, you miss home, and you can't. It's very hard to build routines, you know, like for your own self when you're in that mode of you know, going back and forth. But you also learn other things, you know.
Hey, we're running out of time, but I wanted to ask you. You did the soundtrack for the film Chicago.
Yeah.
Right,
yeah,
and that was nominated for 12 Academy Awards. I think it won something for audio, didn't it?
Yeah, I think it won best sound that year for the. I guess the whole movie, not just the soundtrack. You know, I think it got some Grammys also for the sound. You know.
So did you mix that in 5.1?
I didn't mix it. I didn't mix that movie. I recorded. You know, I recorded everything with Joel Moss, and we went to Air Studios in London. That's where we tracked the band. We were there for like 2 weeks or something like that, and then we took that to Metalworks in Canada, and we did all the actresses, you know, and actors.
Right.
And then I prepped, you know, everything and sent it. I actually don't really know the mixer, you know.
Did they still have the food truck that shows up every day at Metalworks? That was my favorite part of the day.
Yeah.
They had like if you worked at a mill, it was like this guy came in this metal truck and you could order lunch from him.
Exactly. I remember that. Yeah.
But I saw that you did mix a 5.1 something or other, right?
Yeah. I've done a few. I think that one of the ones that I had the time to spend was on that Shakira. It was a live DVD.
Okay, this is
for
what I'm
Sony.
talking about. Yeah.
And yeah, we spent a long time. I tracked it with Joel Singer, the mobile truck. You know, we did it at the Miami Airlines Arena over several nights. The interesting thing with that is that she said one rule, which was like nobody's to re-record anything on the live, or no vocals are going to be retracted or anything. So what I did a single session. There's a single Pro Tools session that has all the nights playlisted in and synced up, you know. And I worked on that file for maybe a year, where
Oh my.
there's just comping between every instrument, between the nights, and just EQing the hell because of all the dancing. This is the hardest thing I've ever
Right,
done. You
right.
know, it's
I'm
just that
surprised she'd
vocal
be the one to
sitting on.
demand that her vocal was from the live performance.
Well, I mean, this is surprising to some people because some people may look at an artist like that and they may think, oh, this is all, you know, it's all fake, or she's not a real singer, she's just a dancer. But this is nothing could be farther from the truth. She really fought that for that to be that way. Of course, if you can isolate, because that's actually printed on the center channel, most of that vocal is just super dry sitting there. And when you solo that center channel, you're gonna hear it's like it's the weirdest thing I've ever heard in my life. The outcome, I wasn't hearing that because I didn't care again. But the automation on those EQs, those are like, I think it's 1 or 2 Massenburg just being automated like crazy and moving because when she's running the stage, I'm filtering out bleed from Brendan in the drums and all this stuff. And the vocal, when you hear it, you're like, it gives you the impression that nothing is happening, you know?
Yeah.
But there's so much EQ that's happening and moving, you know?
Here's my burning question. All right, so you're mixing this record. You've got her vocal in 5/1 for people that don't know is you've got a left, a right channel, a center channel, a rear channel that's mono, and a subwoofer, correct?
No, the rear channel was stereo in this.
1, 2, 3. So okay, so
So
stereo
because
rear.
I remember I got the surround panel. I remember clearly just having fun with effects and
Okay, so
there's circular motion in those mixes.
center,
You know?
right, left, and then right rear, left rear. All right,
Correct.
so as a general thought, it's like and I haven't done nearly enough of this. Vocals in the center, band left, right for the most part, and then in the rear you have reverbs that feel like it was the back of the venue. Do you do this? You don't actually put things back there because it's got a visual representation. You more have like acoustic space. Like her vocals in the center with maybe a mono reverb, but then she's got a reverb that comes from front of house, left and right, and a reverb for the back. Tell me how you like.
Well,
what's the chemistry, the recipe for that?
Well, first I would work and create a stereo mix that sounded musical and that was basically approved. Because there's also a record of that, you know. So once that was approved, then I would unfold this mix and really enhance it. I would start, you know, basically removing that vocal, not the actual all the vocal, but for example the dry vocal, I would remove it from the stereo. I think I did that, and just leave the doublers and stuff like that on the things. But then I would typically have on her, I would have a delay that's automated, like on most of the records that's following her, you know. And that delay is typically a quarter, dotted eighth on the left and a quarter note on the right, and they're cross-feeding each other like 2 PCM 42s. That's how I used to do it on the SSL, and just re-feed back, cross-feed back in the sense. But then I said, well, why don't we expand this idea and have 2 more and then cross-feed to the back? So these delays will ping-pong in the front, center, and then to the back, and then cross. You know, it's a very cool experience when you listen to that. You're like, oh man, this is fantastic. Then we will have. I mean, I think if I'm not mistaken, I rented a Sphere, one of those. I know I rented it from Blackbird back in that day, but it's like a surround microphone that I put over the front of house, and then we had literally.
So when you tracked
mics.
it, you had microphones pointing towards the back.
Yeah, there were mics like right under the array facing the crowd, which were always the best mics because of the null point of the PA, because you have to write all these vocals. And again, she didn't really want to fake it, like bring in a lot of crowds from other shows, which anyway, I did because I went to Mexico and the crowds were crazy. So I had some of those samples, and I brought those 7-1 crowd noises that you know she just kept delaying the entrance, and the people were nuts, and they started making a wave sound. You know, it was like a polyhedron stage, and it sounded incredible. So I had those samples. I put those
Wow, dude.
in some transitions. But going back to the 5-1, what's in the back? I mean, some of the stuff in the back is really cool because she had a lot of interludes between songs, and you know, I guess me being from the time I always remember Pink Floyd and going to those shows and having 5-1, you know, so having that illusion of sound, you know, so I started doing the same thing. There's a lot of sound effects, a lot of keywords, a lot of parts that are happening in the back, and it's awesome. I mean, if you have a well calibrated 5-1 setup, it's a joy. It's not on every song, but the songs that were more trippy or had that kind of space.
It's not like they teach you that, you know, like that's a philosophy of how you want the experience to be, and you've got 5 channels in a subwoofer to do it. So it's not like, hey, you've got to put kick and snare in the center channel. It's not like you kind of make your own rules because you are genuinely figuring out what is this experience and how are we going to put it onto this 5-1 setup. It shows a lot of imagination.
It was all new, but so much fun.
And it took a year to mix?
Yeah, it took like a year because I had the file and I kept, you know, she was on another tour while I was mixing that. It was a very lonely experience for me. I would just progress, and then we would meet. You know, we met at once at Hanson in LA. We met in different studios. I would follow, you know, her, and just every now and then do a checkup, you know, and she would listen. And one night she heard, and she's like, "This is the worst piece of shit I've ever heard in my life," you know, and she walked out.
Meanwhile, you would just spend like a month on it.
Well, yeah, it was more than a month. So I told that's the day I remember I quit. You know, I said to Tim, he's the MD, and he was helping put the record together. Tim Mitchell, great guy, great. So I was like, dude, I mean, I even told him, call this guy. We're here in LA. Call this guy. He should do it. I'm out. so we ended up in a bar around the corner from Hanson in Hollywood, and it was like, you know, 2 or 3 hours later, we're like, we're gonna make the best record ever. He pulled me back in. I'm like, I'm not calling anybody. She's just you know.
Well, you know what, dude?
In the place to listen, you know.
I think really I think that we can appreciate that you care. They know that you care about the record. You take it personally, and you want it to be great. You don't want it to be great because you want to self-aggrandize yourself. You want it to be great because you care about the music and care about what the artist is trying to convey. That's really rare. I love that we can have conversations with guys, and it's like you don't just succeed one way. You succeed, you know, some people can mix records in an hour. Some people mix records in 3 days. Some people, you know, will go travel around the world playing 5-1 references for people and be able to take their lumps and go back and make it better. You know, it's a testament to our craft that there's so many ways to do this, you know, and it's so interesting to be able to talk to a myriad of people, you know, across the spectrum, like the Michael Beinhorn we just had on, and making a record with Michael Beinhorn's a very different experience than making it with me. You know, I wish that wasn't the case. But but it's just a beautiful thing that we can all, at the end of the day, all of us have some really great high-level stuff that we're super proud of. And there's not just one way to get there. And I want to thank you for coming in today and sharing your process and letting us take a peek into your world of how you make music. And it's been I've heard nothing but great things about you. And then to hear your music, I mean, it's some really stellar stuff. There's a lot of stuff I want to talk to you. Maybe we'll have you back on, talk to you about, you know, I was thinking about this SM7 compared to, sometimes it will beat out a C12 or an Elam or, you know, $30,000 mic, you know, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that stuff, but we're going to have to save that for another time. Been gracious hanging out with us, and thank you for all the knowledge and for being just a different dude, man, giving us a different perspective on what we're all trying to do.
Man, it's been nothing than a pleasure for me, and I really appreciate you guys having me. It's been fun. You know, I hope we do it again.
Thank you. I hope you get to Nashville probably quite a bit, right?
Yeah, I'm going next week, actually.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, call me when you get in town. We'll hang out.
All right.
We'll socially distance and hang out. Maybe me, you, and Nir, and Mike.
Yeah, exactly. That would be
Awesome,
fun.
pal. Well, let us know. I'll text you when we're off air. Do you have any websites or anything that people can find you if they want to maybe consider working, if you consider working with them or just find out more about you?
Man, yeah, I do have my website, but it's one of those things that I haven't updated in many years. So I would just say the Instagram.
Instagram.
It's at Gus Celis.
Okay. And we will we'll put that down in the description as well. Thank you so much, man. We had a blast talking to you. From the West Barn, signing off.